Captain Larry Bell with Texas Fishing Tips, and this is your weekly fishing report.
Over here in Mesquite, down on the south shoreline, on the Cedar Bayou flat on this side, water levels have been kind of everywhere this past week. Wind has kind of been a little bit everywhere. It's been decent early and then gets high late. So it's just one of those things we've had to contend with and deal with, working this whole back shoreline all the way down to the mouth of Cedar Bayou, down either edge of Cedar Bayou, the backside of Cedar Bayou, all the way over to Bray Cove. All this area, we've been working the deeper edges of this. You know, the tides up here have been pretty low for the most part, and we've had a little water that'll come back later in the day. But starting out low like that, you want to kind of work these outer edges of the grass and the sand and the shale areas here. They will reveal themselves to you if you're up there and you've been in these areas when that tide is low. You know exactly what I'm talking about. You just have to be aware of what you're going and what you're doing, because especially on this side over here of Cedar Mouth is lots of shale that's there. It's a great wading area. You want to get off on the edge of that cut that runs all the way back there. Just remember that they're continuing to do work back there in Cedar Bayou at the mouth at the Gulf. They got that thing restricted off back there, so just be aware of that. You can walk across there, but you can't run your boat all the way up in there like you used to. But they'll be through with that before too long. Now, one of the things that we need to be aware of getting into this month of July and into August for the artificial people, you guys and gals that like to throw artificials like myself all the time. These 2 months are going to be the toughest months for us, just because water levels, temperature, bite frames are going to be really short. If you're throwing, cut or live bait, then they don't have to worry about it too much. We're going to rely specifically on early mornings, late evenings. Your midday bites, you're going to have to really work around what your bait's telling you. Deeper edges, deeper cuts, including the majors and minors into those middays in these coming weeks. These next 6 to 8 weeks for artificial folks, it's going to be, I'm telling you, it's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough, so don't be disappointed. You're going to have to really scratch out you some fish. So some areas that you know that there's going to be fish holding, which, again, hard-packed sand, shell bars, shell reef, shell pads. These are areas right now that are holding trout. Redfish are working shorelines, working over some grass beds in some of these areas. If you know some of those areas that you've fished and you've been in those areas, you know that these fish are going to be in there. But, again, even the redfish don't like it when it's just like super, super hot. And that's what happens over some of these shallow mud flats and these back lakes. During the middle of the day, you'll start seeing mid 90-degree temperatures in some of these with it's got a lot of mud and grass in there, and that's really difficult for fish. You'll see a lot of mullet that'll be cruising in there, or stingray, but your game fish are going to want to hang out there where it's a little bit cooler. So that's something you need to take in consideration as we head into these next 6 to 8 weeks. And the temperatures are going to look like it's going to be pretty warm heading into these next 6 to 8 weeks. So take that into effect with your decision-making process and where you're going to go. Again, you're really going to have to rely heavily on the majors and minors in some of these areas. Your bait, early mornings, again, you may have to be on some of these spots that you fish. You may have to be there before sunup when you can barely see. Makes it tough. I'm not a big fan of running in the dark myself either, but it may be necessary to do that over the next few weeks. So anyhow, these areas back in here, the points, find that cooler water, little deeper edges, and you're going to locate fish. Make sure you got bait working in the area. Again, the majors and minors. So the primary baits that we've had that we've been working pretty good, topwater baits up shallow real early. I mean, before sun's popping, you're starting to see a little daybreak on the clouds or the sky, and then that's throw it. As that begins to rise up, we've been still throwing 16th-ounce jig heads. May start to transition over to 8th-ounce jig heads here for too long, but I still like the 16th ounce because it allows that bait to really stay in the strike zone for a long time. It makes that bait glide through the strike zone. You don't have to worry about it just dropping into the grass, and you have to really work it to get it out of there in some of these areas, especially if you're working thigh to knee-deep water. Twisted Tea down south, Spurner Shads. Finally, our supermodels are really starting to pay off now. If you were fortunate enough to get to fish these the new moon phase, it was very productive over these last 5 to 6 days. As that being said, we are fixing to transition. We're finishing up the new moon, that 10-day period that's there of the new moon, and we're fixing starting into the wild card days over the next 8 to 10 days. So make sure that you've got a different or options in your box for that, because you get all kinds of days during that time frame, especially with the heat that's going to take place and everything that we got going on. So there may be some tough days ahead, so just be aware of that. Again, the down south originals, supers, burners have all been good. Double D's have been good. Double D's been good over patchy grass. Man, you can work that thing down over top of that. We found some really nice trout in the slot anyway, hanging out over some of these areas. Redfish as well that have been hanging out over some of these patchy grasses and guts. So just remember to take that into consideration with the size jig heads you got, different size baits, profiles as we go into these wild card days. Just work up here in Bray, work the outer edges of it, let the water dictate to you what you're going to do. Get out there waist deep. Maybe we've even found the fish out in chest deep water and cast out even deeper than that. So that's something you may have to do as well. Makes it difficult, but if that's where the fish are at, then that's what you're going to have to do. That's where you may want to have an 1/8 ounce jig head handy if you have to throw it out that far and that deep. If you're wading that kind of stuff, that will help with the presentation of that bait and getting it down to where those fish are at hanging. So anyhow, again, majors, minors, baits, temperature of your water, color selection is going to be key, especially up in this area up here in Mesquite. Long Reef Bend, Long Reef, Half Moon, Tin Can, all these areas out here. It used to be pretty heavy shell bars out here, but after Harvey came through, that took care of a lot of that, and then of course just erosion over time has taken some of these shell bars and shell reefs away. They're still there. They're a little deeper. We've had lower tides consistently, especially here the last couple of weeks. We've had a lot of negative tides, but water's trying to come back a little bit. Had a little disturbance a few days ago that kind of pushed a little water back in here, but it's starting to kind of drop back out again. Again, we're fixing to head into the wild card days. We just finished up the new moon set, which was really good. Incorporate these reefs, especially when it's fixing to be hot, and it's been hot, but this is going to get hotter. These reefs, shell doesn't hold any heat, and it stays cool around those. And if you got some bait fish that are working around some of these areas, trout like to hang around these. Primarily is trout what you're going to target out here. I haven't caught very many redfish off of some of these. Occasionally you will, but majority of stuff that you will catch off of these reefs is going to be trout. Maybe an occasional flounder, just kind of depends on that, but primarily trout's what it's going to be. All these areas out here, that you've got a bunch of little shell bars and shell reefs that are stuck out here. If you've got an updated GPS, or you maybe got the Google Earth overlay that's on some of these GPSs, they're a great information to allow you to locate these things. And then you just have to make sure that the water depth doesn't fool you. So make sure you got a sounding pole, or your depth finder is really reading correctly before you bail off in some of these spots. It might be a little deeper than what you want to deal with. That can happen on occasion. But anyway, these areas out here are really good, especially later in the morning. You can get on them early if you want to, and have some good success. I like to work some of these shallower reefs early and get off on the deeper edges of them. But as that sun begins to rise, those fish will retreat to deeper water because it's cooler for them, and that's where they want to be. They want to be comfortable. So those will be things like, so if you've been fishing shorelines, or maybe some guts or some edges, or even some back lakes early in the morning, and you need a good midday spot, so like after 10, 11 o'clock when it's gotten a lot warmer, go hit these reefs in the middle of the day. Got just a little bit of bait working out there. This is another spot we're talking about earlier, where still throwing a 16th ounce jig head or 1/8 ounce here would be a perfect application for that. So you got deeper edges off these shell bars, and it will help with the presentation of that bait, working down the edges of that, or you working it back up, depending on how far out you throw or how you're working it. Spalding Reef, all over here, Jaybird Reef, these areas here as well are great locations to be working in and around these. If you know of other little shell pads or shell reefs that are in and around this area, or wherever the area that you like to fish up in these areas, these would be great spots for you to begin your day, or even fish throughout the day, because these fish will, again, as the sun gets up, they're going to retreat to deeper water. The fingers of Carlos Great location, deeper guts, lots of shell. You got edges, you've got grass that's on the outer edge of that. You got the old ICW that's over here that can be a great location. It's deep. It's deep on that, so make sure if you're going to wade off of that little bar that's over there, that big shell flat, headed toward Dunham, that thing drops off to about 17, 18 foot, so make sure you just don't just bail off in there because it's not going to touch the bottom for you. But great location for fish to be hanging off on that deeper edge, and again, that's where your 1/8 ounce jig head would work. If you want to bump it up to a quarter, you can. I'm not a big fan of that, but crazier things have happened. So if you want to bump to a quarter, that's fine as well. 1/8 should be ample for you. But again, work these shell bars and shell pads. Again, Twisted Tea in the down south has been money for a while. That color combination has been super good in these waters up here. Also in the burner shad, the original size and the supermodel, those in that Twisted Tea color has been great. Magic Grass has been great. Chicken of the Sea has been great in all three sizes. Also, top water, we've worked a little bit over some of these, but not as much. But it's been primarily plastics, the darker colors. Also in the white ice, Bone Diamond have been good as well off these edges. These fish are locating that. Just kind of pay attention to what your water color is and what you have going with that, with your currents and everything. Again, majors and minors, you double D. Another bait that's been pretty good around the shell bars and shell pads that are up in here, because you can really work it on top of that thing without it getting hung up, and that thing slow ascends, so you get some really good opportunities with that particular bait. But back to the majors and minors, make sure you incorporate those into your day, especially this time of year. It's for artificial people, it's extremely important to be able to incorporate that throughout your fishing day to continue to be productive. Rattlesnake Point over in Port Bay, Swan Lake. I love fishing that area over in here. You got, again, a lot of shell, a lot of edges out here. These fish like to get up on top of this. A lot of good trout that have been hanging off in these areas here. There's been some good fish that's being caught. Some of that in that new slot and that, that 17 to 23 for trout. There's been some that's been caught, that 19 to 21 that are coming off of this point here. Pete's Bend back in that area there. You got a lot of shell that's back off in those edges. Port Bay, off of the Swan Lake area, these deeper edges, especially now that it's getting hot, and it's consistently getting hot. Water temps are starting out in the mid-80s, and they're hovering close to 90 by early afternoon, especially in the shallower water and shallow areas. So you want to find some deeper water that's adjacent to these particular areas. So this edge here, I've talked about this edge a lot here off of Port Bay and off Swan Lake, this flat that's here a lot. So the reason why is because it's deep. It's got deep water to it. It allows those fish to retreat to it, and they can be comfortable. When they're ready to come back up on that flat and look for something to eat, and they have that opportunity, they can feel safe about it. But it's a great location for fishermen to get up here and get on these edges and work these deeper edges. Again, going back to the 16th ounce, 1/8 ounce jig head. This is another great location. If you're going to fish that deeper edge, put that 1/8 ounce jig head on there and work it. If you don't want to jack with that, that's fine. Leave that 16th ounce jig head and fish that waist deep water or less, and you'll be just fine. But again, there's plenty of shell that's up and down this little flat that's right here, right off this edge. You've got some old abandoned piers and duck blinds are up in here, so be careful as you're wading this particular area. If you have been there before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's lots of those that are up and down this, but you gives yourself lots of opportunity. Especially with our south-southeast breeze that we've had, this area here is pretty protected. You've got that little peninsula that pops out right there, so you can get behind this and tuck away. And fish protected in this area if you don't want to contend with the wind. On this point that comes around here, you can wade through this little gut that goes into this backside of this flat, this big mud flat there, and work around this island. All that area there is really good. Again, down south Twisted Tea has been good in all three phases, or for all three sizes. Magic Grass has been good. Chicken of the Sea, especially in the burner shad. Now we're fixing to get into those 10 days of the wild card days, headed toward a full moon. So smaller baits would probably be something that you may want to start with, and then maybe jump up to a larger size, whether it be the super or the original. Just something to kind of play with, to let you know, to see what's kind of what the fish are wanting. I always tend to want to start with the smaller bait during this time frame, because they're more apt to eat something smaller as opposed to something bigger, because they may not be as aggressively feeding. So it's just from a theory standpoint and just from experience, seeing that consistently happen. Italian Bend is another area that's down here. You can get on this big sand flat on this point and work all this area down in here. Redfish get scattered over the top of that thing, especially in certain conditions when you got the nice amount of bait and mullet that's been working down through these areas. Get back up in there in Italian Bend. You can fish those little back lake mouths. Fish the deeper edges if you like. It gets pretty shallow back in here. If you've been in Italian Bend, you know this. So get out there where it's about waist deep, maybe belly deep, bottom of your chest deep water, and fish out a little bit deeper. Good healthy grass that's in here, lots of bait working in here, Finlogan and Cape fish, not consistently but pretty consistently every time that we have fished this particular area. But again, those bait choices and colors have been money back in here. You know, Twisted Tea, Magic Grass, Chicken of the Sea, the Bone Diamond and White Ice have all been the main ones that I've thrown. Incorporate your topwater bait back in this area here of Italian Bend. It has become really good. And I've taken the trebles off and put single hooks on it, so that helps kind of with the weedless setup, because there's a lot of floating grass that's back in some of these areas, so just be aware of that. Again, hotter weather coming. For artificial people, it's going to be more difficult for us, so you really have to work and you have to really be patient in areas that you know that there's going to be some fish holding. Based on your indicators, bait, current, water levels, tide. And again, the most important thing really is going to be your majors and minors during those time frames for us to really maximize our catching opportunities up here in the Copano Bay and Port Bay areas.
Thanks for watching. I'm Captain Larry Bell.